My uncle raised a toast. $1.6 million, cash buyer today? I asked. Are you sure it's yours to sell? He scoffed. I opened the folder. Grandma's deed. My name. His deal died on impact. But that was the end. This is the beginning. Where I still believed in the lie, that submission equaled safety. The dirt road to Turner Ranch felt different that Saturday afternoon. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary as the tires of my sedan kicked up familiar plumes of golden dust behind me. For 6 years, I had driven this route, every single weekend, faithfully following Maggie's simple instruction to keep the place running. I could navigate it blindfolded. Past the leaning mailbox, with the faded Turner name, around the sharp bend where wild sage grew thick along the weathered fence line, up the gentle slope where the barn's deep red roof first appeared against the vast Idaho sky. When I crested that final rise, my foot slammed the brake hard enough to make the engine stall. A massive, industrial dumpster blocked the main driveway. It was an alien structure, dull green metal sides towering higher than my car, wide enough to swallow a small truck. It looked brutally efficient, designed for disposal, not ranch life. I felt a confusing, sharp tension twist in my gut. I hadn't ordered this. My engine idled, shuddering slightly. Movement beyond the container caught my eye. Ron. My uncle stood near the porch, in clean khaki pants and a pristine, light blue polo shirt. Clothes I'd never seen him wear for actual ranch work. He was gesturing impatiently at 3 men in work gloves, their movements quick, rough, and methodical. They were carrying things from the house, armloads of things, moving with the efficient brutality of people paid by the hour to remove obstacles. I killed the engine. My door swung open before I had fully processed a plan. Ron. My voice cracked across the yard, thin and unfamiliar. He turned, saw me, and his face shifted into an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't guilt or sadness. It was closer to annoyance. Maybe surprised that I'd shown up an hour early. One of the workers carelessly heaved a large cardboard box over the dumpster's rim, and I heard the sickening crash of breaking glass inside. My boots hit the gravel and I was running. The dumpster's cold metal rim reached my shoulder. I had to grip the edge and pull myself up onto my toes to see inside. The breath left my lungs in a silent rush. Grandma Maggie's gardening journals. The leather, bound ones she had filled with her careful, looping handwriting every spring for 40 years. They were scattered at the bottom like refuse, spines broken, pages spread open and soaking up the muddy water, pulled in by yesterday's rain. A photo album lay face down, its plastic sleeves torn away. I could see the corner of a sepia photograph pressed into the dirt. Maggie, a young woman, standing proudly in front of this very barn. The quilt. The word was a choked whisper. It was the cream and blue patchwork. The one Maggie and I had spent 3 Idaho winters sewing together at her kitchen table. My stitches were clumsy, uneven next to her perfect, tiny ones. She had laughed and said the imperfect squares made it more honest. Now it was crumpled at the bottom like a filthy rag someone had used to wipe engine oil. Stop. The word tore out of me, sharp and loud enough this time to be heard. Stop right now. The workers froze mid-stride, their eyes flicking to Ron for direction. He started walking toward me, unhurried, and there was a tight, controlled anger in his expression that made my hands curl into useless fists. Aurora, he said, using my full name like a teacher addressing a difficult child who had interrupted a lecture. This is estate business. Estate business. I couldn't keep the shake out of my voice. You're throwing away her journals, her photos, her life. Clutter? Ron clarified, stopping a few feet away, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. He had always been tall, always used it as a tool of dismissal. The property has liability issues. Insurance won't cover the place in this condition. A second worker emerged from the house, carrying another box. Ron plucked something small from the top before the man could toss it. A smaller leather journal. I recognized it instantly. Maggie's treasured recipe book, the one with her mother's handwriting faintly visible in the margins. Ron held it up between us, making sure I was watching. Then, with a casual flick of the wrist, he tossed it into the dumpster. The journal hit the mud with a soft, final thud that I felt in my chest. You can't, I gasped, my throat closing. You have no right. I'm the executive, Aurora. The will was clear. He crossed his arms, cementing his position. And before you get emotional, you should know the locks have been changed. New deadbolts on all the doors. Professional grade. The property needs to be secured during the transition period. My eyes snapped to the front door. Shiny brass hardware gleamed where the old iron lock had been. The lock Maggie gave me a key to 6 years ago, when she first asked me to help maintain the place. Movement on the porch drew my attention. Elaine. Ron's wife stood with her arms crossed, her stance a mirror of his. She didn't speak, just watched, the silent witness to my humiliation. Insurance requirements, Ron continued, his voice taking on the false managerial authority he used when he didn't actually understand the details. Professional assessment of the property value. You wouldn't understand the complexity involved. My body wanted to move, wanted to shove past him and climb into that dumpster, to rescue every piece of Maggie from the mud. My hands shook, fists so tight my nails cut crescent moons into my palms. But my mother's voice echoed in my skull. Family is everything, Aurora. Respect your elders. Be the bigger person. Keep the peace. I had internalized that lesson my whole life, until it became the steel bars of my own cage. I stood there, trembling, unable to move or speak the furious words burning in my throat. Ron mistook my paralysis for surrender. He turned back toward the house, dismissing me with the movement. Don't make this hard on the family, Aurora. Elaine finally spoke from the porch, her voice carrying across the yard. We're doing what's necessary. Necessary. As if necessity justified erasing a person. I should have left. Driven away before I did something I'd regret. But I couldn't move. Instead, I reached into the dumpster, stretching until my ribs pressed against the cold metal edge. My fingers closed around one of the leather gardening journals, pulling it free. The cover was damp and mud-smeared, but when I opened it, Maggie's handwriting was still visible. May 1, 1998. Planted the tomatoes early this year. Aurora helped dig the rows. I was 12 that summer. Ron watched from the porch as I walked back to my car, the rescued journal clutched against my chest. He didn't try to stop me. Why would he? He had already won the battle. I slid behind the wheel and set the journal carefully on the passenger seat. My hands were filthy with dumpster grime, and my vision blurred at the edges. But I wasn't crying. I wasn't crying because underneath the shock and the hurt, something else was crystallizing. Something cold and clear. Ron wasn't just neglectful. He wasn't just overwhelmed or incompetent. He was deliberately erasing Maggie, throwing her away like garbage. The realization settled into my bones as I started the engine. And as I drove away, watching the ranch disappear in my rearview mirror, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being the good niece. 3 days passed before I returned to Turner Ranch. 3 days where the shock gave way to that cold, clear focus I'd felt driving away from the dumpster. I had spent that time in my small apartment, reviewing the documents Maggie had given me over the years: utility bills, repair receipts, and property tax records. They all pointed to the same truth: I was the one who cared, and Ron was the one who planned. This time, I didn't drive up the main road. I parked my sedan a quarter of a mile down the county lane, driving specifically into the dense, overgrown sagebrush behind a dilapidated equipment shed. From the main road, the car was completely invisible. The morning air bit cold against my face as I cut through the brush on foot, avoiding the driveway entirely. I moved like a ghost, using the property's neglect as my camouflage. When I circled the house, Ron's new security measures gleamed in the weak winter sun. Shiny brass hardware marked the location of the new deadbolts, locks that probably cost more than the monthly utility bills I had paid for 6 years. Ron's truck wasn't in the yard. Neither was Elaine's SUV. The house appeared empty, but I moved carefully anyway, pressing close to the weathered siding. The cellar door was exactly where I remembered it. 20 years of aggressive ivy growth had nearly swallowed the entrance. The wooden frame was soft, half-rotted, the kind of overlooked detail Ron would never inspect. It was too dirty, too beneath his attention. I pushed aside the thick vines, their leaves rustling loudly in the silence, and there it was, the old, iron lock Maggie had never bothered to replace. My spare key, a heavy, familiar piece of metal, slid in as if it had been waiting for this moment. The lock clicked. The sound felt enormous, making my heart jump. Even though I was alone, I eased the door open, wincing at the deep creak of hinges that hadn't moved in months. Darkness yawned below. I pulled out my phone, thumbing on the flashlight, and descended the steep stone steps slick with moisture. The cellar smelled like deep earth, old wood, and abandonment. The beam from my phone cut through the dark, catching cobwebs and dancing motes of dust. I crossed the dirt floor to the interior stairs, each step deliberate, listening for any sound from above. When I emerged into the kitchen, I stopped, the air freezing in my lungs. Everything was wrong. The sturdy pine table, where Maggie and I had sewn the blue and cream quilt, sat shoved against the far wall, buried under a shifting mountain of cardboard boxes. The grandfather clock, that had stood in the hallway for 40 years, was gone, leaving only a clean, light rectangle on the faded wallpaper where it used to be. The walls themselves were bare, stripped. Photo outlines were still visible in the faded paint. Ron hadn't moved furniture, he had annihilated memories. I moved through the house like a trespasser in my own past, cataloging the destruction. The living room furniture was shoved into careless clusters. Maggie's favorite reading chair faced the wrong direction, away from the wide window, where she always sat to catch the afternoon light. The bookshelf held nothing but a few damaged paperbacks Ron had probably deemed worthless even for the dumpster. The study door was open. Papers covered every surface inside. I stepped over a collapsed stack of file folders and approached the desk. This was Ron's domain now. His frantic, sprawling handwriting scrawled across sticky notes plastered to the lamp, the wall, and the desk calendar. They were reminders about appraisals, inspections, and closing dates. The cold language of liquidation. My hands were steadier than they had been during the confrontation on the driveway. As I started searching, the top drawer held nothing but pens and rubber bands. The second drawer stuck halfway, jammed with junk mail and unopened envelopes. I pulled harder, and it gave, its contents spilling onto the floor in a cascade of glossy paper. That was when I saw it. The survey map. It was wedged between two thick catalogs, one corner visible. I yanked it free and spread it across the desk, smoothing the creases with trembling fingers. Turner Commercial Plaza. Read the header in bold, decisive print. It was a developer's draft. Parking lots drawn where the lush pasture should be. Retail spaces plotted across the 96 acres Maggie had spent her life protecting. The date stamp in the corner made my stomach drop with sickening speed. 8 months before Maggie died. Ron had planned this while she was still alive. My breath came short as I scanned the margins. His familiar handwriting appeared there, too. Notes scribbled in blue ink, clear by Q2Yas, next to the barn location. Max liquidity, underlined twice next to the property value estimate. I sank into the desk chair, the map clutched in my fists. He wasn't reacting to estate pressure. He wasn't scrambling to handle unexpected executive duties. He had already decided to sell. He had already found a developer. He had already mapped out the destruction of everything Maggie had built. My hands moved on autopilot, digging through the remaining papers. There had to be more. There had to be proof of the why. The loan application hid beneath a stack of grocery circulars. Crumpled. Nearly thrown away. I flattened it against the desk and read the bank stamp at the top. Application rejected in harsh red letters. The date matched the survey map. Give or take a week. The applicant line showed Ron's signature, and there, listed under proposed collateral, typed in neat bureaucratic font, Turner Ranch Nenti, 6 acres. He had tried to use the ranch for his own personal loan. The bank had refused because he didn't own it. He couldn't leverage what wasn't his. So he had waited. Waited for Maggie to die. Waited to pretend the estate needed liquidation, when really, he just needed to cover his own debts. I photographed everything. The map. The loan rejection, the handwritten notes. My phone's camera clicked, rapid fire, in the silent study, each image backing up automatically to the cloud. Evidence. Proof. Ammunition. The sound of tires on gravel froze me mid-motion. Ron's truck. I shoved the documents back into approximate disorder and moved fast toward the cellar stairs. Down into the dark, across the dirt floor, up through the exterior entrance. The ivy fell back into place as I eased the door shut, my pulse hammering in my ears. By the time Ron's truck door slammed shut in the yard, I was already halfway through the sagebrush, invisible. A thief in the night with the truth of the ranch secured on my phone. 2 days after my stealthy exit from the ranch, I sat in William Hartley's office. The drive had been a blur of nervous energy. The weight of the survey map and the loan application, though only digital photographs now, pressed on me like lead. Hartley's office felt like stepping backward in time. Oak paneling lined the walls, giving off the dry, comforting smell of old paper and history. The leather chairs were worn soft from decades of use, and law books lined the shelves, their titles written in faded gold script. Hartley himself looked exactly as Maggie had described him years ago, 70 years old, sharp-eyed, with the patient demeanor of a man who had seen every trick and every family squabble twice. I spread the stack of photographic printouts across his vast, polished desk without any preamble. The commercial plaza map, the scribbled notes on max liquidity, and the crumpled loan application with the damning application rejected stamp across the top. He studied them in silence, reading glasses perched low on his nose. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. When he finally looked up, something in his expression had shifted, hardened from patient curiosity to recognition. "Ronald has crossed a line," he stated. Not as a question, but as a judgment. He tried to use the ranch to cover his own debt before Grandma Maggie was even in the ground. I said, my voice tight. "He's not liquidating, he's stealing." Hartley steepled his fingers, his gaze steady. "There's something you need to understand first, Aurora. Something Maggie did 2 years ago, when she first realized how sick she was, and how little trust she had left in her son." He reached into a fireproof safe, hidden behind a framed state bar certificate, and pulled out a heavy manila envelope. He slid a single, notarized document across the desk. "The deed is valid. An inter vivos transfer. Maggie signed the title over to you in February 2022. The ranch," he paused, letting the full weight of the words settle, "was never part of the estate. It has been your property for 2 years. The words landed like absolution, like a physical weight being lifted from my chest. I stared at the paper. My own signature, younger and less steady, next to Maggie's unmistakable cursive. "Then we can stop him," I said, a surge of adrenaline hitting me. "Right now. Before he sells to this developer. I can file an injunction." Hartley removed his glasses, folding them with deliberate, precise care. "We could. But Ron, as the named executive, would fight it. He would use estate funds, Maggie's money, to drag you through court for years, expensive years. Even if you win, the legal fees would bleed the ranch dry. He wins by exhaustion." My euphoria crashed back into cold fear. "So, what do I do? Let him sell my land? You let him commit?" Hartley's voice dropped lower, confidential. "You let him sign contracts with the developer. You let him take a deposit. You let him commit the financial fraud, demonstrably and in writing. Then you produce this deed." I leaned back in the worn leather chair, processing the painful logic. "You want me to let him think he's winning. I have to stand by while he destroys the house and makes the sale. I want you to let him prove he's guilty," Hartley corrected sharply. He tapped the photo of the rejected loan application. "This isn't negligence, Aurora. This is premeditated fraud. But we need him to demonstrate intent and action after the estate was opened. Give him rope. Let him hang himself." The strategy was brutally effective, but it required everything I hated: silence, waiting, and letting the devastation continue in the name of a long-term victory. I spent the next hour with Hartley, going over the necessary steps. Every document needed to be duplicated, backed up, and timed perfectly. The ranch was mine, but my ownership had to remain an absolute secret. The final weapon held, until the moment of irreversible commitment, by Ron. The drive home felt profoundly different. The anxiety had been replaced by something colder, something intensely focused. I wasn't the helper anymore, desperately begging for peace. I was a hunter, setting a trap. That evening, I created a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it Blue Folder. Turner Ranch Documentation, and began uploading files. The scanned deed Maggie gave me. The photos from Hartley's office. I added my own photographs next, cataloging Ron's current neglect. The rotting eaves I reported months ago. The horses he wasn't feeding adequately. The crumbling barn he refused to repair. Every dismissive text message he had sent. Every email from his lawyer. Timestamps on everything. I verified the cloud backup, closed the laptop with a quiet click, and looked at the blue folder icon. My silence wasn't submission anymore. It was a strategy. Every day Ron thought he had won. Every text message he sent demanding I accept reality was another day he dug himself deeper. Another day he committed to a sale he had no legal right to make. Another day he proved William Hartley exactly right. I had the truth. Now, I just had to wait for Ron to tell his biggest lie. I spent the next several weeks operating in a tense, strategic silence. Ron's texts multiplied. They were initially polite inquiries about my acceptance of financial reality, but they quickly grew aggressive. Bleeding frustration through the screen. I saved every message, dated and time-stamped, adding them meticulously to the blue folder. Every ignored demand was proof that he was desperate and that he believed he was winning. Summer burned out, autumn leaves fell, and then the true Idaho winter descended. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in 3 days. A brutal, sudden shift that turned the landscape brittle. I noticed the severity of the change first at the ranch on a Thursday evening in late January. I was driving out after work with my headlamp and toolkit in the back seat, still performing my quiet, invisible maintenance tasks. The cellar door resisted when I pushed it open, the metal hinges contracting and seizing in the cold. Inside, my breath came out in visible puffs, under the bare bulb of my flashlight. January in Idaho meant winter wasn't a possibility anymore. It was a vicious, immediate reality. The barn was worse. I pushed through the side door, and the cold hit me like a physical wall. Not the mild chill from last month, but something aggressive. The kind of cold that settles deep into your joints and refuses to leave. I flipped the light switch, and the overhead fluorescents flickered on, illuminating thick clouds of breath condensing instantly from the stalls. Maggie's 2 remaining mares, Stella and Daisy, stood with their heads low. Their breath came out in white plumes. When Stella shifted her weight, I could see the tiny goosebumps rippling across her flank under her winter coat. A coat that hadn't fully grown in yet. I hurried to the heating oil gauge mounted near the door. It was empty. The needle sat firmly on 0. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An email from Ron to the family group thread, sent 20 minutes ago while I was driving. Subject line update. I opened it with a sudden dread. The message was brief and sickening. Update. Implementing cost-cutting measures before closing. Heating oil delivery can, sold for barn. Developer assessment next month. I read it 3 times. The developer assessment. The one that would show the ranch in perfect, financially lean condition, ready for demolition and conversion to the Turner Commercial Plaza. The heating oil expense would show up as overhead, making the property look less profitable on paper. So Ron cut it, made the numbers prettier for his buyer, and the horses froze. My hands began to shake, but not from the cold. I couldn't intervene legally. Not yet. Hartley had been crystal clear, revealing the deed now meant years of court battles, while Ron, using estate funds, slowly destroyed me financially. The trap only worked if Ron committed fully to the sale, proving his bad faith beyond any reasonable doubt. But I couldn't let Maggie's animals suffer while I waited for strategy to align. I pulled up the Tractor Supply website on my phone. Portable space heaters, commercial grade, $200 each. I calculated quickly. I needed at least 4 to make a dent in this massive space. Thermal blankets for the horses, designed to hold heat. Another $100. Extra hay bales, because they would need more calories just to stay warm. Another $200 for rush delivery tonight. $800 total, cash out of my savings, unrecoverable. I worked through the checkout process, entering my debit card information with numb fingers. The confirmation email arrived with a tight delivery window. Tonight, between 8 and 10 o'clock. That gave me 2 hours. I spent the time hauling every spare blanket I could find in the house storage closets, draping them over the stall doors to block drafts. I stuffed old towels and rags into the massive gaps where the barn siding had warped with age. Stella watched me work, her dark, kind eyes following my every movement. When I passed her stall, she pressed her nose against my shoulder, her warm breath against my frozen cheek. "I know," I whispered into her soft muzzle. "I'm here now." The delivery truck arrived at 9:15. The driver, looking mystified by the dark, empty property, helped me unload the 4 industrial heaters and the massive hay bales. Cash transaction. No receipt with Ron's name on it. He drove away. And I was alone with the heaters and a plan that violated every strategic instinct Hartley had tried to teach me. I plugged in the first heater near Stella's stall. The orange glow of the heating element filled the corner of the barn, and within minutes, I could feel the difference. Not warm yet, but the aggressive, biting edge of the cold retreated slightly. I positioned the other 3 heaters strategically, creating overlapping pockets of warmth near the stall areas. The thermal blankets went over both horses, secured with the heavy chest straps designed for this purpose. I was adjusting Daisy's blanket when I heard boots crunch on the gravel outside. My hand froze on the strap. The barn door was already open from the delivery, and I had left the cellar entrance unlocked behind me. Stupid. I had been so focused on the horses, I had forgotten basic security. The footsteps stopped right at the barn entrance. Thought I saw lights. It was Sam Miller's voice. Not Ron. Not Elaine. I turned around slowly, still crouched beside Daisy's stall. Sam stood in the doorway, his weathered face shadowed by the orange glow of the heater behind me. He was wearing a heavy canvas jacket and work gloves, dressed for cold night labor. His eyes moved slowly, taking in me, the heaters, and the thermal blankets. He didn't ask what I was doing here. He didn't question my right to be on property Ron claimed to control. Instead, he walked past me to the far wall, where the insulation had torn away from the studs, leaving wide gaps that whistled in the wind. He examined it for a long moment, running his gloved hand along the damaged section. "This won't hold heat," he said simply. "Got some foam board in my truck. Be right back." He was gone before I could respond, leaving me alone with the quiet realization that I was no longer fighting this battle invisibly. Sam Miller returned within 10 minutes. Not with the foam board he'd promised, but also with a cordless drill and a stack of rigid foam insulation panels, tucked under one arm. We worked in silence for the next 2 hours. Sam cut and fitted the panels while I held them precisely in place. He drilled them into the barn studs, with the practiced efficiency of a man who knew every warp and flaw in the wood. We systematically sealed the gaps that had been leaking warmth for what I realized must have been 5 or 6 winters. Every few panels, he would pause, check his work, adjust the angle, or add an extra screw where the weathered wall curved slightly. The only sounds were the whine of the drill, the soft, contented shuffle of the horses in their stalls, and our labored breathing in the cold air. Around 11 o'clock, Sam produced a large thermos from the pocket of his heavy canvas jacket. He poured dark coffee into the metal cap and handed it to me, without asking if I wanted any. The liquid was still hot enough to burn my tongue. It was bitter, strong, and perfect. We stood side by side, near one of the humming space heaters, warming our hands on the thermos. Outside, snow began to fall. Small flakes at first, then larger ones that caught the light spilling from the barn windows. Sam watched them accumulate on the gravel, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice low and raspy. "Maggie told me what she did." My hand tightened around the thermos cap. The deed. The deed. He continued, confirming my thought. February 2022. She had me witness the notary appointment. Said, "You were the only one who loved the land, not the money." The validation hit me harder than the cold. I had spent months questioning my sanity, my right, and my motives against Ron's false authority. To hear it confirmed by Sam, the man who had worked alongside Maggie for 2 decades, brought a tightness to my throat. I had to look away, focusing on the falling snow until I could trust my voice. "Ron doesn't know," I managed. "Ron's an idiot," Sam countered simply, taking the thermos cap back and pouring himself a measure. He didn't elaborate, but the conviction in the statement was absolute. "I wanted to tell you sooner, Aurora, but Maggie made me swear on her Bible. Said you had to find your own fight first. Said, if I handed it to her, it wouldn't mean as much." He paused, watching the heavy, silent snowfall. "Maggie knew that too. Why she chose you." We finished the coffee in silence, punctuated only by the low hum of the heaters. When Sam finally left around midnight, he paused at the barn door. "You need anything else?" "I'm 10 minutes down the road." He pulled a dirty card from his pocket, set it on the workbench. His cell number written on it in thick permanent marker. Day or night. The door closed behind him, and I was alone with the horses and the heaters and the quiet, solid truth. Maggie saw me. She chose me. She trusted me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't selfish. I wasn't the problem Ron had spent months telling the family I was. My phone buzzed. Another text from Ron, sent just to me this time. "Why so quiet, Aurora? Finally accepting reality, I read it twice. Then I sat the phone face down on the workbench without responding. For 6 years, I had answered every question, explained every decision, and justified every hour I spent here, seeking approval that never came, permission I never needed. My silence used to mean submission. Now, standing in the repaired, warm barn, it meant something else entirely. It was the calm before the storm. I checked the heaters one more time before I left, adjusting the settings to maintain a steady warmth through the night. The horses were already drowsy in their thermal blankets, the barn temperature hovering at a survivable 50 degrees. Over the next week, Ron's texts multiplied rapidly. Developer coming next month. Time to be realistic. Family unity requires compromise. Aurora. Your silence is noted. I saved every message, screenshotting them with timestamps, uploading them to the cloud drive where I kept the survey map and the loan application. Each text was more aggressive than the last. Ron's frustration bleeding through the professionally worded threats. The blue folder grew thicker. On Tuesday, a certified mail notice appeared in my apartment mailbox. I signed for the package on Wednesday morning before work. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, and official-looking. I tore it open in my car before starting the engine. Turner family reunion. Mandatory attendance. The date was mid-February, just after the developer was scheduled to arrive. Location: Turner Ranch. Agenda: final decisions regarding estate liquidation. Ron's personal note was paper-clipped to the formal invitation. His handwriting was aggressive and cramped. Time to make this official, Aurora. The developer needs an answer. My hands didn't shake when I slid the invitation into the blue folder, filing it neatly behind the deed, and the survey map, and the months of documented evidence. The clock had run out. The trap was ready. On the day of the mandatory reunion, the ranch house hadn't held this many people since Grandma Maggie's funeral. 35 relatives filled the rooms, their voices bouncing off the walls that used to absorb only silence and my solitary footsteps. It was a carnival atmosphere, confusingly festive. I stood near the kitchen doorway, watching cousins I hadn't seen in years pile their plates high with catered food that must have cost a fortune. Estate funds, undoubtedly. Ron's idea of calculated magnanimity. White tablecloths covered every surface, crisp and formal. Nothing about this felt like the familiar, lived-in ranch I knew. Ron moved through the crowd in a suit, actual wool, tailored, the kind he used to mock other men for wearing. He was playing a role today, shaking hands, touching shoulders, the benevolent patriarch distributing wisdom and difficult decisions. Elaine worked the perimeter, her movement tracked from aunt to cousin to uncle. Her hand landed on forearms, her voice low and sympathetic, planting seeds, watering the narrative she and Ron had carefully cultivated for months. Such a stubborn girl. Doesn't understand the financial reality. The whisper came from somewhere behind me. Maggie would want what's best for everyone, not just Aurora's sentimental notions. I pressed my spine against the door frame. The canvas bag hung from my shoulder, its weight familiar and comforting. The blue folder, inside, felt heavier than paper should, containing the full weight of the truth. Ron clapped his hands twice, sharp cracks that successfully silenced the entire room. Family. If we could all gather in the dining area. His voice carried the false, practiced warmth of a car salesman, closing a deal. I have a presentation that will clarify our situation. People shuffled, holding plates and wine glasses. Ron had set up his laptop on the sideboard, a cable snaking to the flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace. The screen glowed blue, waiting. I took a seat at the far end of the long dining table, the chair Maggie used to occupy. No one protested. The first slide appeared. Turner Estate Financial Reality, in bold letters over a photo of the barn. A barn I knew Ron hadn't entered in years. A's executive. He announced, "I've conducted a comprehensive assessment." Ron advanced to the next slide. Numbers filled the screens: property taxes, maintenance costs, projected repairs. Every figure was inflated beyond recognition. "The debt burden," he said gravely, "is unsustainable." A cousin to my left leaned forward, studying the figures. Aunt Martha covered her mouth in shock. The next slide showed photographs of the ranch, each carefully selected. The rotting eaves I reported to Ron months ago, never fixed. The fence section that collapsed last winter, when he refused to budget for posts. The peeling paint on the barn's north side. Every image screamed neglect, and none showed the work I had done. The repaired stalls, the maintained pastures, the garden I'd kept alive. The property has fallen into disrepair. Ron's tone suggested tragedy, rather than his own intentional abandonment. Continuing to maintain it would consume resources the family simply cannot afford. My fingers curled into the canvas bag strap. The final slides showed an architectural rendering. Glass and steel where the barn stood. Paved parking where Maggie's garden grew. Commercial plaza, rendered in clean fonts and modern angles. The solution is straightforward. Ron paused for dramatic effect. A reputable developer has offered $1,650,000 for the property. Murmurs rippled through the room. Someone whistled low. This allows us to preserve the family legacy by converting it to liquid assets. Everyone benefits. The Turner name endures in a new, modern form. The screen went dark. Ron closed his laptop with a decisive click. I watched him, my mind racing. He was bluffing about the finalized deal. No developer cuts a check without a clear title search, unless this final consensus document wasn't just a formality. It was a power of attorney. He needed the entire family to sign away their supposed fractional rights so he could leverage the estate to get the deposit. He desperately needed to cover his own personal debts. Which brings me to the final matter. He produced a clipboard from behind the sideboard, papers attached. Official looking. A heavy silver pen rested on top. I've prepared a family consensus document. Simple formality. Everyone here has already reviewed and agreed. He walked the length of the long table, his steps measured, confident. The clipboard landed directly in front of me, with a soft thud. All 34 other people turned their heads. The document was dense with legal language. I would need an hour to parse it properly. Signatures filled the bottom 2/3. Names I recognized: Uncle Jim, Aunt Martha, cousins I played with as a child. All in agreement. One line remained blank. Mine. Would just need your blessing, Aurora. Ron's voice was gentle now, almost paternal. Then we can move forward as a united family. Elaine appeared instantly on my shoulder. Her hand settled there, warm and heavy. Do the right thing, honey. Pressure built in the silence. 34 pairs of eyes. Some sympathetic, some impatient, some already counting their share of $1,650,000. Ron had already turned away from me, angling toward the corner, where a man in an expensive suit stood apart from the family. The developer's representative. Ron gave him a subtle nod, the gesture of someone already celebrating. I reached for the pen. My hand shook as I lifted it. The tremor was visible, humiliating. I looked small, isolated at the end of this long table, holding this heavy pen, surrounded by family who had already decided my fate. The room exhaled. Shoulders relaxed. Elaine's grip loosened slightly. I held the pen over the signature line, the blank space where my name should go. My hand hovered there, shaking, and I closed my eyes. Breathe. Maggie's face surfaced in the darkness. Her hands covered in garden soil, laughing as I struggled with crooked fence posts. Her voice when she handed me the key 6 years ago. You're the only one who sees it, Aurora. The only one who understands what this place means. February 2022. The lawyer's office. Her signature next to mine on different paper. I opened my eyes. The pen cap clicked closed between my fingers. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. I set the pen down, still capped, untouched to paper. Before I sign, Ron. My voice was quiet, but it carried the academic advisor's measured tone I used when a student had falsified their transcripts. I have one procedural question. Ron's confident smirk wavered at the edges. Procedural. Aurora. This isn't complicated. Did you personally pull the deed from the county recorder's office? The room's energy shifted. Confusion replaced expectation. People glanced at each other, uncertain what the question even meant. Ron waved a dismissive hand. Why would I need to check what I already control? The will was explicit. I'm the executive. This is my authority. Right. I reached down to the canvas bag at my feet. My hands were steady now. Your authority. The blue folder slid out onto the white tablecloth. Every eye in the room locked onto it. I met Ron's gaze directly for the first time all day. His smirk had vanished completely. I opened the blue folder. The sound of the clasp releasing felt enormous in the sudden, tense silence of the dining room. Inside, the documents were arranged exactly as William Hartley and I had prepared them. Each page was protected in a clear sleeve, each piece of evidence in perfect, damning sequence. Then you don't know, I stated calmly. I slid the first document across the polished wood table. Grandma Maggie transferred the title of this land to me 2 years ago, February 2022. The paper glided to a stop in front of Ron. It was the official county letterhead across the top. Margaret Ellen Turner's signature, in her careful cursive, lay beneath a block of bureaucratic text. My signature was beside hers, younger and less steady. The county recorder's stamp, raised and textured in blue ink, where the seal pressed into the paper, declared, Inter vivos transfer property, deed recorded and legal. Ron's hand shot out and snatched the document. His eyes scanned the page once, twice, his face shifting through expressions too quickly to track, landing on pure, ugly disbelief. This is a forgery, he grated, his voice loud. But there was a tremor underneath it now, a hairline crack in his armor. I pulled the second document from the folder. Here's the notary log. 3 witness signatures, including the ranch handyman, Sam Miller. The notary stamp matches the one on the deed. Ron's face flushed scarlet. She was senile. She didn't know what she was signing. Around the table, relatives leaned forward, straining to see. Cousin Dave reached instinctively for the deed, and Ron jerked it away from him, clutching the paper. Dr. Keller's medical capacity affidavit. I placed the third document on the table. It was dated the very same day as the deed, the 14th of February, 2022. It stated clearly that Grandma Maggie was of sound mind and fully understood the legal implications of the property transfer. Elaine's heavy hand dropped from my shoulder. She took a step back, her eyes fixed on the affidavit. Ron stood up, his chair scraping loud against the wooden floor. She didn't understand the financial necessity, the taxes, the maintenance costs. She was living in the past, not facing reality. I had been waiting for this exact moment. The moment when he would pivot from legal arguments to emotional ones. When he would try to make this about Maggie's supposed ignorance instead of his own scheming. I pulled out the draft survey map. The oversized paper unfolded, covering a large section of the table, and I smoothed it flat with both hands. Turner Commercial Plaza. The header read, utterly juxtaposed with the scene of the family gathering. The date in the corner was 8 months before Maggie died. Ron's handwriting filled the margins clear, by Q2, max liquidity. The silence in the room changed texture again, becoming something thick and heavy with realization. And you didn't do this for the family. My voice was steady, perfectly controlled. I had practiced this moment in my head 100 times, but now the words came naturally. You did it, because the bank rejected your personal loan. The final document. The crumpled loan application I had found buried in his messy study, now smoothed out and photocopied. Ron's signature at the bottom. Turner Ranch 96 acres listed as collateral. The harsh, undeniable red denied stamp across the top. I watched understanding spread through the room like spilled water. Aunt Martha's hand rose again, this time to cover a gasp. Uncle Jim pushed his chair back, the legs squealing. Ron tried to use the ranch as collateral. The bank rejected him, because he didn't hold the title. I explained, looking directly at the sea of bewildered faces. He couldn't leverage property that wasn't his. I kept my eyes on Ron's face, now an alarming shade of mottled red. You weren't saving the estate. You were trying to get us to sign a power of attorney, so you could secure a deposit. Selling property you didn't own to cover your tracks. The man in the expensive suit, the developer representative, stood up. He didn't say anything at first, just reached down and picked up his briefcase. When he spoke, his voice was clipped and final. This deal is dead. Title isn't clear. He turned and walked out. His footsteps echoed down the long hallway. And then the front door closed with a final, decisive click. Cousins reached for the documents, passing them hand to hand, reading the dates. The signatures, the cold evidence of Ron's planning, while Maggie was still alive and frail. Ronald. Aunt Martha's voice shook with betrayal. You lied to all of us. Uncle Jim was on his feet now, his face tight with anger. You said Aurora was being selfish. You said she abandoned Maggie. She did abandon her. Elaine's voice cracked across the room, desperate. This is a betrayal of family trust. I stood. Not quickly, not dramatically. I simply rose from my chair, and the room fell silent again, all eyes on me. The truth was spreading, undeniable. 6 years of weekend drives, 6 years of fence repairs and veterinary bills. Sitting beside a dying woman while Ron planned commercial plazas and personal loan applications. "This is private property," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, foreign, strong. I had never drawn a line this sharp before. "You have 1 hour to vacate." There was no apology in my voice, no softness, no attempt to cushion the blow or make it easier for anyone. Just the boundary, clear and immovable. Ron opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The authority he had worn like armor had cracked, and underneath, there was just a man who had gambled and lost on property he never owned. Elaine snatched her purse from the side table. Her face crimson, lips pressed into a thin white line. She didn't look at me as she moved toward the door. Relatives began gathering their things. Some avoided my eyes. Others nodded slightly as they passed. Something like shame or respect in their expressions. Movement in the doorway caught my attention. Sam Miller stood there. His weathered face creased in something that might have been a smile. He had heard everything. Of course, he had. He had been waiting for this moment as long as I had. William Hartley appeared behind him, briefcase in hand. "I can help coordinate the exit if needed," Hartley said to me, his sharp eyes taking in the scene of total collapse. Ron was the last to move. He stood by the table, the deed still in his hand. For a moment, I thought he might try to destroy it. But he just let it fall back onto the wood surface. When he walked past me, he didn't speak. The man, who had thrown Maggie's journals into the dumpster, who had changed the locks, who had tried to erase her, he had nothing left to say. The front door closed behind him. I was alone in my grandmother's house. My house now. The owner, not the trespasser. The steward, not the thief. I sank back into the chair and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The driveway looked different without the presence of the dumpster or Ron's massive, pretentious truck. I pulled up to Turner Ranch on a Sunday afternoon in late August, 6 months after the reunion that had changed everything. The air smelled of dry sage and fresh soil, not decay. The same dirt road, the same bend in the fence line where sage grew wild. But the flowers were blooming now. Purple lupine and yellow arrow leaf crowded the gate posts where weeds used to choke the ground. The barn wore fresh red paint. The fences stood white and straight. The horses grazed in the pasture with healthy, gleaming coats that caught the sunlight, no longer shivering in their stalls. Sam Miller's truck sat near the renovated bunkhouse where he lived now. Rent, free caretaker, friend, and a silent partner in the ranch's rebirth. The arrangement suited us both perfectly. I parked and gathered the pie William Hartley had dropped off this morning. Homemade cherry, still warm in its dish. He visited monthly these days, always bringing legal updates wrapped in conversation and baked goods. Today, he was staying for dinner. Inside, the dining room table was set for 8. 3 of my colleagues from the university were already here, laughing about something that had happened at registration last week. They understood now why I had been so distracted last year. Why I kept checking my phone during meetings and disappearing every weekend. Sam sat at the head of the table with me, an honored guest in the home he had helped save. He was telling a story about the garden's tomato harvest, his weathered hands gesturing as he described the vines heavy with fruit. Maggie would have been proud. he said. And the words settled warm and true in my chest. William arrived as we were setting out plates. He placed the pie on the counter and shook hands with everyone, his sharp eyes taking in the newly renovated kitchen with clear approval. The oppressive silence that used to fill this house had been replaced by something lighter, something alive. Laughter, the clink of silverware, the normal sounds of human connection that felt revolutionary here. Over dinner, conversation drifted toward the legal resolution. One of my colleagues asked about Ron, and I realized I hadn't thought about him in weeks. The court appointed a neutral administrator for the remaining cash assets, William explained, helping himself to roasted potatoes. Once the evidence of fraud surfaced, Ron was removed as executive entirely. Some relatives took his side, I added, passing the salad bowl. We haven't spoken since the reunion. My colleague Sarah winced. That must be hard. Losing family. I considered this. 6 months ago, the thought would have crushed me. Family is everything. Keep the peace. Be the bigger person. I didn't lose family. I said now, and I meant it. I lost people who enabled theft. The weight I had carried for so long was gone. These people around my table. They were built on honesty and respect, not obligation, not blind loyalty to blood ties that had meant nothing when I needed help. After dinner, I walked the fence line alone, as the sun dropped toward the horizon. It was the same walk I had taken for 6 years. When this place wasn't officially mine, when I fixed posts and paid utility bills, and sat with a dying woman while Ron stayed away. But everything felt different now. My boots followed the path I had worn into the grass. I wasn't the helper anymore, sneaking onto property that belonged to someone else. I was the owner, the steward, the one Maggie chose. Her wisdom had proven true in the end. I stopped at the gate where Ron had locked me out before, where I had stood trembling with rage, unable to physically confront him, because my conditioning wouldn't allow it. A new lock gleamed in the evening light. My key. My choice. Inside the house, visible through the kitchen window, the journal I rescued from the dumpster sat in a glass case. Maggie's handwriting was preserved. Her memory was honored, not erased. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. 96 acres stretched before me, land I had saved by loving it when no one else would, by choosing labor over entitlement. I pulled the gate closed and turned the key. The lock clicked with satisfying finality, not keeping people out, but keeping peace in. I stood there a moment longer, breathing the cool evening air, watching the shadows lengthen across the property. Somewhere in the pasture, a horse snorted. The barn door creaked softly on its hinges. Small, domestic sounds that belonged to me now. Grandma knew. She always knew. I pocketed the key and walked back toward the house, where light spilled warm from the windows, and my friends were probably arguing over who did the dishes. Real family. The kind you build yourself,